2. I want to clear my throat out a little bit. Any opinions? Should I put on music for anybody? Anyone got suggestions? I'm going to go ahead and keep on reading while people steal on that. That's a fine jet fiddle. Tommy Tester didn't even have to look up to know he'd found a new mark. He simply had to see the quality of the man's shoes, the bottom end of a fine cane. He plucked at his guitar, still getting used to the feel of the new instrument, and hummed instead of sang because he sounded more like a talented musician when he didn't open his mouth. The trip out to Queens last month had inspired Tommy Tester to travel more. The streets of Harlem could get pretty crowded with singers and guitar players, men on brass instruments, and every one of them put his little operation to shame. For Tommy had 3 songs in his catalog. Each of those men had 300. But on the way home from Ballad's place, he'd realized he hadn't passed a single strum along the way. The singer on the street might have been more common in Harlem and down in Five Points, or more modern parts of Brooklyn, but so much of the city remained, essentially, a bit of jumped-up countryside. None of the other Harlem... Wait. Oh, here we go. Page turn. None of the other Harlem players would take a train out to Queens or rural Brooklyn for the chance of getting money from this famous, thrifty immigrants homesteading in those parts. But a man like Tommy Tester, who only put on a show of making music, certainly might. Those outer borough bohunks and paddies probably didn't know a damn thing about serious jazz, so Tommy's knockoff version might still stand out. On returning from Ballad's place, he talked all this through with his father, Otis Tester. Yet one more time, offered to get him work as a bricklayer, join the profession. A kind gesture, a loving father's attempt, but not one that worked on his son. Tommy Tester would never say it out loud. It hurt the old man too much, but working in construction had given his father gnarled hands and a stooped back. Nothing more. Otis Tester had earned a Negro's wage, not a white man's, as was common in 1924. And even that money was withheld if the foreman sometimes wanted a bit more in his pocket. What was a Negro going to do? Complain to whom? There was a union, but Negroes weren't allowed to join. Less money and erratic pay were the jobs, just as surely as mixing the mortar when laborers didn't show up to do it. The companies that had hired Otis Tester, that always assured him he was one of them, had filled his job the same day his body finally broke down. Otis, a proud man, had tried to instill a sense of duty in his only child, as had Tommy's mother. But the lesson Tommy Tester learned instead was that you better have a way to make your own money, because this world wasn't trying to make a Negro rich. As long as Tommy paid the rent and brought home food, how could his father complain? When he played Ballad's number, it as he dreamed it would, and he brought a fine guitar case. Now it was common for Tommy and Otis to spend their evenings playing harmonies well into the night. Tommy had even become moderately better with the tune. Tommy had decided against a return to Flushing, Queens, though. A hustler's premonition told him he didn't want to run into Ma again. After all, the book he'd given her had been missing one page, hadn't it? The very last page. Tommy Tester had done this with purpose. It rendered the tome useless, harmless. He'd done this because he knew exactly what he'd been hired to deliver. The supreme alphabet. He didn't have to read through it to be aware of its power. Tommy doubted very much the old woman wanted the little yellow book for casual reading. He hadn't touched the book with his bare hands and hadn't read a single word inside, but there were still ways to get the last sheet of parchment free safely. In fact, that page remained in Tommy's apartment, folded into a square, slipped right inside the body of the old guitar he always left with his father. Tommy had been warned not to read the pages, and he'd kept to that rule. His father had been the one to tear out the last sheet, and his father could not read. His illiteracy served as a safeguard. And this is how you hustle the arcane. Skirt the rules, but don't break them. Today, Tommy Tester had come to the Reformed Church in Flatbush, Brooklyn, as far from home as Flushing, and lacking any angry sorceress. He wore the same outfit as when he went to visit Ma, his trooper's hat upside down at his feet. He'd set himself up in front of the church's iron-railed graveyard. A bit of theater in this choice, but the right kind of person would be drawn to this picture. The black jazz man in his frayed dignity, singing softly at the burying ground. Tommy Tester knew 2 jazz songs and 1 bit of blues. He played the blues tune for 2 hours because it sounded more somber. He didn't bother with the words any longer, only the chords and a humming accompaniment. And then the old man with the fine shoes and the cane appeared. He listened quietly for a time before he spoke. "That's a fine get fiddle," the man finally said. And it was the term get fiddle that assured Tommy his hustle had worked. As simple as that. The old man wanted Tommy to know he could speak the language. Tommy played a few more chords and ended without a flourish. Finally, he looked up to find the older man flushed, grinning. The man was round and short, and his hair blew out widely like a dandelion's soft white blowball. His beard was coming in, bristly and gray. He didn't look like a wealthy man, but as the well-off who could afford such a disguise. He had to be risked to risk looking broke. The shoes verified the man's wealth, though, and his cane, with a handle shaped like an animal head, cast in what looked like pure gold. "My name is Robert Sidon," the man said. Then waited, as if the name alone should make Tommy Tester bow. "I'm having a party at my home. You'll play for my guest. Such dusky tunes will suit the mood." "You want me to sing?" Tommy asked. "You want to pay me to sing?" "Come to my home in 3 nights. Robert Sidon pointed toward Martinez Street. This old man lived there in a mansion hidden within a disorder of trees. He promised Tommy $500 for the job. Otis Tester had never made more than $900 in a year. Sidon took out a billfold and handed Tommy $100, all $10 bills. "A retainer," Sidon said. And Tommy set the guitar flat in its case and accepted the bills, turning them over. 1923 bills. Andrew Jackson appeared on the front. The image of Old Hickory didn't look directly at Tommy, but glanced aside as if catching sight of something just over Tommy Tester's right shoulder. "When you arrive at the house, you must say 1 word and only this word to gain entrance." Tommy stopped counting the money, folded it over twice, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "I can't promise what will happen if you forget it," Sidon said, then paused to watch Tommy, assessing him. "Ashmodai," Sidon said. Sidon? I'm going to say Sidon. Sidon said. "That is the word. Let me hear you say it." "Ashmodai," Tommy repeated. Robert Sidon tapped the cane on the pavement twice and walked away. Tommy watched him go for 3 blocks before he picked up his hat and put it on. He clicked the guitar case shut. But before Tommy Tester took even 1 step forward the train station, he got gripped, hard on the back of the neck. 2 white men appeared. One was tall and thin, the other tall and wide. Together they resembled the number 10. The wide one kept his hand on Tommy's neck. He knew this one was a cop, or had been once. Up in Harlem they called this grip John's handshake. The thin one stayed 2 paces back. The surprise of it all caused Tommy to forget the pose of deference he'd normally adopt when cops stopped him. Instead, he acted like himself, his father's son, the kid from Harlem, a proud man who didn't take kindly to being given shit. "You're coming on a little strong," he told the wide one. "And you're far from home," the wide one replied. "You don't know where I live," Tommy snapped back. The wide one reached into Tommy's coat and removed the $10 bills. "We saw you take these from the old man," he began. "That old man is part of an ongoing investigation, so this is evidence." He slipped the bills into his slacks and watched Tommy to gauge his reaction. "Police business," Tommy said coolly, and stopped thinking that the money had even ever been his. The wide one pointed at the thin one. "He's police. I'm private." Tommy looked up from the private detective to the cop. Tall and thin and lantern-jawed, his eyes dispassionate and surveying. "Malone," he finally offered. "And this is..." The wide one cut him off. He doesn't need my name. He didn't need yours either." Malone looked exasperated. This strong-arm routine didn't seem like his style. Tommy Tester read both men quickly. The private detective had the bearing of a brute, while the other one, Malone, appeared too sensitive for a cop's job. Tommy considered that he'd stayed a few paces back to keep away from the private dick. Not Tommy. "What's your business with Mr. Sidham?" the private detective asked. He pulled Tommy's hat off and looked inside as if there might be more money. "He liked my music," Tommy said. Then, calm enough now to remember the situation, he added another word quickly. "Sir." "I heard your voice," the private detective said. Nobody could enjoy that. Tommy Tester would have liked to argue the point, but even a corrupt, violent brute could be right sometimes. Robert Sidham wasn't paying $500 for Tommy's voice. For what then? "Now me and Detective Malone are going to keep strolling with Mr. Sidham. Keeping him safe. You're going to go back home, isn't that right? Where's home?" "Harlem," Tommy offered. "Sir?" "Of course it is," Malone said quietly. "Home to Harlem, then," the private detective added. He set the hat back on Tommy's head and gave Malone a quick, derisive glance. Let me read that again. He set the hat back on Tommy's head and gave Malone a quick, derisive glance. He turned in the direction where the old man had gone, and only then did Malone step any closer to Tommy. Standing this near, Tommy could sense a kind of sadness in the gaunt officer. His eyes suggested a man disappointed with the world. Tommy waited before reaching down for his guitar case. No sudden moves in front of even a sullen cop. Just because Malone wasn't as rough as the private detective didn't mean he was gentle. "Why did he give you that money?" Malone asked. "Why, really?" He asked, but seemed to doubt an honest answer would come. Instead, there was a set to his lips, and a narrowness in his gaze that suggested he was probing for an answer to some other question. Tommy worried he'd mentioned the performance at Sidham's home in 3 nights. If they weren't happy about Tommy talking with Sidham on the street, how would they act upon learning he'd planned to visit the old man's home? Tommy lost $100 to the private detective, but he was damned if he'd give up the promise of $400 more. He decided to play a role that always worked on whites, the clueless Negro. "I can't say, sir," Tommy began. "I's just a simple guitar man." Malone came close to smiling for the first time. "You're not simple," he said. Tommy watched Malone walk off to catch up with the private detective. He looked over his shoulder. "And you're right to stay out of Queens," Malone said. "That old woman isn't happy with what you did to her book." Malone walked off and Tommy Tester remained there, feeling exposed, seen, in a way he'd never experienced. "You're a cop," Tommy called. "Can't you protect me?" Malone looked back once more. Guns and badges don't scare everyone.